Solo Leveling by Chu Gong. Chapter 3 Part 2 The Final Test. Jinwoo opened his eyes. A white ceiling and the distinct smell of disinfectant greeted him. He was lying on a hard mattress. He knew immediately where he was. The hospital? His visits to the hospital had decreased significantly since he'd met Juhee, a B-rank healer, but even so, hospitals were as familiar to him as his neighborhood convenience store. There was even a rumor that Jinwoo Sung had a designated room at the hospital affiliated with the Hunters Association. He sat up, then put his hand on his chest and felt his heartbeat. His heart was beating normally. I'm alive? Something else also seemed off. His body felt weirdly light. Usually, whenever he woke up in a hospital, Jinwoo was often dazed and had difficulty moving around. But it was different this time. He felt refreshed, like after a good night's sleep at home. What happened? Considering the situation right before he'd lost consciousness, this didn't make any sense. The sword had been coming down at him. Even if by chance it had missed him, he'd been completely surrounded by some fearsome foes. An A-rank or even an S-rank strike squad arriving on the scene would have been no match for them. And I survived? It was like it had all been a dream. As luck would have it, there was one surefire way to verify everything. Jinwoo lifted the blanket covering his body. If it was real, he would be missing a leg, and if it had been a dream... Are you awake? Jinwoo jumped and turned toward the deep voice that had addressed him from a corner of the room. Apologies if I scared you. We couldn't wait any longer, you see. Two men in black suits approached the bed. Jinwoo blinked at them. Who are you? He didn't recognize them at all. The one with a short military haircut handed Jinwoo a business card. This is what we do. Jinwoo took the card. Jinchul Woo, Korean Hunters Association Surveillance Team? Surveillance was the only team within the Hunters Association composed solely of strong hunters. Their role was to supervise all the hunters in the association, so it made sense that such an elite corps would have the cream of the crop. Jinwoo was still confused, though. But what brings you here? Jinchul Woo pulled up a chair next to Jinwoo's bed and sat down. The other suit, who Jinwoo assumed was his subordinate, stood behind him. The threatening presence of these two well-built men so close to Jinwoo was intense. What they told Jinwoo shocked him. I was asleep for 3 days? Do you remember what happened before you passed out? Yes. Please tell us everything you remember. Before I do, what about those two? Mr. Song and Juhee, are they safe? Jinchul met Jinwoo's earnest gaze and nodded. Yes, they're completely safe. Both were in severe condition, but they are thankfully alive and well. Phew. As Jinwoo let out a relieved sigh, Jinchul quietly asked, Now, could you please tell us what you remember? He told them everything that had happened until he'd lost consciousness except for the strange hallucinations he couldn't understand. And then you lost consciousness. Is that correct? Yes, the next time I opened my eyes, I was here. Jinchul and his subordinate exchanged glances. They seemed a bit troubled that their only potential witness didn't know anything. The truth was, Jinwoo was the one who most wanted to know what had really happened. If I may, how did I get here? Did a big guild get rid of them? The thing is... The troubled Jinchul took his time answering. Taking survivors' reports into account, the surveillance team brought along members of the White Tiger Guild, but when they arrived at the room, everything. The White Tiger Guild was a huge guild that ranked as one of the top 5 in Korea. Bringing White Tiger on board meant the association had recognized just how dangerous the situation was. What exactly had happened over there? Jinwoo gulped. Everything. Everything was gone. There was absolutely no trace of the giant statue or the other stone sentries. There was nothing except you lying there unconscious. Excuse me? Jinwoo stared at him, incredulous. We couldn't believe it either. If the survivors' stories weren't perfectly consistent or we hadn't found the remains of the other hunters, we would have thought different. Jinchul rubbed his chin. This was his 6th year working in the surveillance team after awakening as an A-rank hunter. He was confident he had experienced all sorts of adversity and enemies, so this was a first. He'd even sought the advice of guilds as well as associations of other countries, but they'd all been dead ends. And so, here's what we think, Jinchul said cautiously. There was definitely something powerful in that room. And those things were defeated by someone or several someones. That's what we concluded, since nothing escaped into our world before the gate closed. They had to be open to all kinds of possibilities. They had to consider all the scenarios, however unlikely or impossible. The association had contemplated the situation again and again, and had ultimately come up with one theory. Jinchul watched for Jinwoo's reaction as he continued. We believe that you had a second awakening, Hunter Jinwoo sung. A second awakening? Jinwoo's eyes widened. It was rare, but a person who had already awakened as a hunter could have a second awakening. This was also known as a reawakening. Most of the hunters who experienced this process came out much stronger than they'd been previously. Once a hunter's rank was set, there usually was no way to change it. A hunter's ability was established when they awoke as a hunter. But reawakened hunters were different. They surpassed their limits, and a C-rank hunter could level up to an A rank, and a B-rank hunter could even level up to an S rank. Jinchul swallowed nervously. Jinwoo sung. If he reawakened as an S-ranker, or maybe even more powerful than that, it would have been possible for him to defeat all those beasts. The survivors had specifically pointed out that the giant statue had vaporized C-rank hunters using only its eyes. How powerful would an individual have to be to defeat that kind of magic beast while unconscious? The association had classified this case as top secret and made sure everyone involved kept it absolutely confidential. Those who'd come to visit Jinwoo in the hospital had been given only minimal information about his current state. For the same reason, Jinwoo had been assigned a private room and the best doctors in the hospital. Jinchul's heart sped up. To think that we might finally have a national rank hunter in Korea. There were fewer than 10 national rank hunters in the entire world. They were said to hold more power than a nuclear weapon, and if Korea could have one too. Fortunately, it wouldn't be difficult to verify whether he'd had a second awakening. One must strike while the iron is hot, so to speak. Jinchul gave an order to his subordinate. Bring it here. The subordinate took something from a bag in a corner of the room and brought it over. Is that? Jinchul began explaining before Jinwoo could finish asking. This is a manometer. He explained that the device was a smaller, though no less effective, version of the one found at the Hunters Association headquarters. All you have to do is place your hand on this essence stone. A fist-sized essence stone sat embedded in the middle of a round board. It was an ebony stone that looked like a black hole one could get sucked into. It was the highest rank essence stone in existence, harvested from an A rank or higher magic beast. An essence stone in good condition could go for more than 1 billion won. Jinchul spoke up in a serious tone when Jinwoo continued to wordlessly stare at the essence stone. This is a necessary procedure for our investigation, so your cooperation would be greatly appreciated. Jinwoo nodded. If this really was the reawakening he'd often dreamed of, his life would take a complete 180. They were offering to verify it at no cost, so he had no reason to refuse. He placed his hand on the essence stone, and it started to emit a faint glow. Both Jinchul and his subordinate were sweating in anticipation. FSHHHHH. The light surrounding the stone faded. Jinchul hurriedly took off his sunglasses and checked the result. He blinked in disbelief. That can't be! He double-checked the number, but it remained the same. What? How could someone with a hunter's license have only 10 mana? When one took into consideration that E-rank hunters average between 70 and 100 mana, Jinwoo's mana level was closer to a regular civilian's. However, so is it a reawakening? What's my new rank looking like? Jinwoo's palms were sweating. The result must have been extraordinary if the two surveillance agents were reacting this way. Jinchul nodded after comparing Jinwoo's current result with his previous data. The result from his initial test was 12. Now, 4 years later, the result is 10. Even though it went down by 2, that's within the margin of error. The mana meter wasn't broken. Jinwoo's mana was simply unbelievably low. Frankly, it was a miracle he'd survived until now. There must have been a misunderstanding. I apologize. Jinchul decided staying any longer would be a waste of time and quickly stood up. Let's go! Yes, sir. They quickly packed their bags. Could you please tell me? Jinchul turned slightly and merely responded, Thank you for your cooperation. If you remember anything else, please contact us. The two men in black rushed out of the room like they had somewhere else they urgently needed to be. The space felt empty without them. Jinwoo rubbed the back of his neck. Guess I shouldn't have gotten my hopes up. If he really thought about it, he didn't feel any different, other than that strange sense of refreshment. Plus, it would have been impossible to defeat all those things by himself even if he had experienced a second awakening. Maybe if it was the S-rank hunter Jongin Choi or Gun Hee-go, who's considered an S-rank among S-ranks, they could have taken them on by themselves? Since he'd never seen either of them fight against magic beasts, his speculation was pointless. Not much was known about S-rank hunters. They were like gods among men. Lost in thought, he shifted his gaze up to the ceiling. Huh? As soon as he did, he saw letters floating in the air. You have unread messages. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Jinwoo tried closing and then opening his eyes again. You have unread messages. The letters were still floating in midair, unchanged. Jinwoo shook his head hard to clear it and tried rubbing his eyes, but still nothing changed. He placed his hand on his pounding forehead and craned his neck down. A few days ago, I was hearing things, and now I'm hallucinating. Maybe there really was something wrong with his brain? There's a thing called post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It's a disorder prevalent in people who endured severe traumas or major accidents. Hearing things and having hallucinations after losing most of your colleagues and surviving a near-death experience wasn't so strange. But some things couldn't be so easily explained. His gaze went to his leg. My leg is fine. His leg, which had definitely been severed by a stone statue shield, was there. The underground temple of the double dungeon, the voice he'd suddenly heard, his completely healed leg, and now the message floating in front of him. So many unexplainable things were happening at once. Maybe it was possible all those things weren't separate incidents but were instead connected. Having reached a possible conclusion, he felt his headache abate slightly. Fine. Jinwoo raised his eyes. He was curious about the contents of those messages now that he was calmer, and his head wasn't throbbing quite so much. The messages might contain hints that explain some of the mysterious happenings. Jinwoo extended his hand to the letters. His fingers passed through them. It's not touch activated. It seemed Jinwoo was a little too used to smartphones. He couldn't think of any way to open messages other than via touch screen. As he pondered how to check the messages, he recalled what had happened right before he lost consciousness. Oh, right! The communication between himself and the strange voice had been conversational. Will it work if I think it in my head, or do I have to say it out loud? Jinwoo ended up deciding to try speaking every possible command word. Check. Message. Check message. Read message. Look. I want to look. Let's take a look. Show me. Just then. What is it you want to look at so badly? Feeling like he was being watched, Jinwoo turned to find his sister, clad in her high school uniform, peeking back at him from behind the half-ajar door. Jinwoo didn't know what to say. He'd been caught begging someone to show him something while staring up at the ceiling. He didn't really have any explanation for his behavior. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. You sure you didn't hit your head? Jinwoo shook his head at his sister's question, posed from a distance. No. Jina-sung continued regarding him suspiciously, even after his response. Are you really okay? I said I'm fine. She looked him up and down, as if to assess his condition before charging toward him like a raging bull. Jinwoo quickly raised his hands to defend himself as she started smacking him. I told you to stop getting hurt. Do you know how worried I was? I'm sorry. Other hunters are always fine, so why do you always get hurt? Sorry. Jina's blows weakened, and she eventually bowed her head and started crying. Jinwoo gently stroked his sniffling sister's back. His heart felt heavy. How could I even think about dying and leaving her behind? He was glad to be alive. The giant's eye lasers, the shield that had severed his leg, the spear that had impaled him. Thinking back, there had been more than a few times when he felt his life was in danger. It was almost like he'd woken up from a horrific nightmare. Jinwoo's gaze drifted to the letters hovering in the air. You have unread messages. It's like I still haven't woken up from that dream. There was so much that was unexplainable, but none of that mattered. The important thing was that Jinwoo was still alive and could see his family again. Sniff. Luckily, his brave sister soon stopped crying, though she continued nagging him for another hour afterward. Got that? If you get hurt one more time, I'm going to drop out and get a job and make you quit being a hunter. Jina's sharp eyes, which didn't suit her lovely face, were very much like Jinwoo's. Okay. He nodded with an expression that indicated he was sick of this lecture. She made him promise several more times before she was satisfied, then stood to leave. Where are you going? School. I only got permission to check on you briefly. I have to go back. He nodded in understanding. Your university entrance exam is next year. Jina had never once had a private tutor or taken any extra classes after school, but she was always at the top of her grade. Jinwoo was fiercely proud of her. Jina's dream was to become a doctor. A few years back, she'd only liked hanging with her friends and playing video games. After their mother fell ill, though, she'd made up her mind to become a doctor and become glued to her desk. Jinwoo wanted to make sure her dream came true. Wait a minute. A video game? Jinwoo's eyes flashed. Okay, I'll see you later. He quickly called to her before she could leave the room. Jina. What? When you play a game. She grinned. I don't really play these days. I'll be a senior soon. I know, but I have a question. Really? About what? Have you started playing? Perhaps because this used to be her area of expertise, Jina seemed eager to help. Jin-woo quickly glanced at the words still floating in the air. What do you do if you have an unread message that you want to check in a game? Well, first, you'd open your inbox. Open your inbox? Ping. As soon as he said, open, the hidden messages were revealed with some kind of alert sound effect. You have 2 unread messages. Congratulations on becoming a player. Unread. Daily quest. Strength training has arrived. Unread. Jinwoo's face lit up. Yes. Her brother's sudden giddiness made Jaina uneasy. What? Which game is it? Should I help you? Jin-woo shook his head firmly. No. I want to try it by myself. How would his sister react if he told her what he was currently experiencing? I don't want her to think I'm crazy. Jin-woo swallowed the words he desperately wished he could say. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Jin-woo made sure Jaina got in the elevator under the pretense of seeing her off, then hurried back to his hospital room. Can't make the same mistake again. Click. He even locked the door to make sure there would be no witnesses. Preparations complete, Jin-woo sat on the edge of his bed and started reading through the messages. Congratulations on becoming a player. Unread. Daily quest. Strength training has arrived. Unread. He felt like he'd seen the title of the first message somewhere. Where have I heard that before? It sounds familiar. Ji-woo decided to start with the first message. Congratulations on becoming a player. Unread, check. Ping. This system is designed to assist the development of the player. Failure to comply with the system may result in a penalty. The rewards have been delivered. Ah! He belatedly remembered where he'd heard those words. That had been the last thing the voice had said to him before he'd passed out. It mentioned a player or something back then, too. He hadn't understood what that meant then, and he didn't fully understand it now. System, development, penalty, rewards. They were just a bunch of vague terms to him. How the heck is it going to help me develop? And what kinds of rewards are they planning to give me? Because it was using video game terminology with no good explanation of what it all meant, Jin-woo couldn't help but be confused. He decided to move on and open the next message. Daily quest. Strength training has arrived. Unread, gulp. Jin-woo involuntarily reacted to the noteworthy subject line. His heart started racing. Check. Ping. Daily quest. Strength training. Push-ups 100 times. Incomplete. 0 out of 100. Sit-ups 100 times. Incomplete. 0/100. Squats 100 times. Incomplete. 0/100. Running 10 kilometers. Incomplete. 0/100. Warning. Failure to complete the daily quest will result in an appropriate penalty. After reading the message, Jin-woo laughed in spite of himself. Seriously? It was a big letdown, to say the least. Despite having such a grandiose subject line like strength training, the daily quest message had merely been an endurance training exercise regimen. Jin-woo couldn't argue that he'd definitely be in slightly better shape if he completed it. Were those the development and rewards mentioned? Now that I think about it, he'd once read in a book that those going through an inner conflict should lend an ear to their inner voices. Guess I'm just seeing what I want to see. How badly did he want to get stronger that his mind was conjuring these unbelievable delusions? He let out a bitter laugh. If I could have become a stronger hunter with this kind of thing, why would I have endured all those hardships? He shook his head. He thought himself pathetic for trying to search for answers to his doubts in a message that might be a hallucination. Whatever. Jin-woo sprawled out on his bed and wordlessly stared at the ceiling. Time flew even though he wasn't doing anything. He started feeling the weight of the silence filling the hospital room. He abruptly sat up. What if? What if something really would happen? Half full of anticipation and half doubtful, Jin was mind filled with the thought of trying it out. I have nothing to lose anyway. If he considered it some light exercise, there was no reason not to do it, right? He finally made a call. He'd do it. Jinwoo got out of bed and, after a light warm-up, gripped the bed frame and started slowly doing push-ups. 1, 2, 3. His count increased quickly. 97, 98, 99, 100. He finished 100 push-ups, but to his disappointment, nothing changed. Nothing except that his arms were now a little bit sore. What did I just do? He snorted and straightened up. Congratulations on becoming a player. Read. Daily quest. Strength training has arrived. Read. The status of the messages had changed from unread to read. There were no more unread messages, and he wasn't in the mood to play along with the delusions any longer. That was enough of that. Jinwoo closed the message screen without hesitation. Huh? He yawned hard and climbed back into bed. Perhaps it was because this was the most active he'd been in a while, but he was getting drowsy. The sky outside the window was being painted in the colors of a sunset. It's already this late? The two agents from the surveillance team had told him the association was going to foot his hospital bills. Jinwoo planned to use the opportunity to get a full checkup and leave only after receiving a clean bill of health from the doctors. These were Jinwoo's thoughts as he lay in bed. The hallucinations and visions should go away in due time. His eyes gradually slid shut. Jinwoo fell into a deep sleep. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The clock on the wall diligently moved its hands as Jinwoo slept. They went round and round and round, and eventually, the clock read 11 hours 59 minutes and 57 seconds. Tick, tick, tick. 58 seconds, 59 seconds, 60 seconds. The hands of the clock stopped at exactly 12 o'clock. Ping. You have not completed the daily quest. You will be transferred to the penalty zone for the allotted time. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Rumble. Jinwoo woke from the strong vibrations rocking his whole body. The earthquake? He bolted upright and grabbed on to the end of the bed. The earthquake was so powerful, it was hard to keep his balance. Rumble. The tremors grew stronger as time passed. And then, FWSSSHHH. The metal bed frame he was clinging to suddenly broke. No, it didn't break, it disappeared. Jinwoo hastily inspected what was in his hands. Instead of the metal of the bed frame, all that remained in his fist was sand. Sand? FWSSHHH. The other half of the bed frame crumbled into sand as well. The earthquake got even stronger. Rumble. Arg! Jinwoo eventually tumbled off the bed. He screamed as he was flung around the hospital room. One by one, all the furniture transformed into sand. Ah! Wham! Jinwoo was thrown in a random direction and ended up buried. He felt something smooth. It turned out to be very fine sand. Meanwhile, the earthquake stopped. Black! Ugh! He lifted his head urgently while spitting sediment out of his mouth. Before him was an endless landscape of sand. Jinwoo frowned as he got to his feet, grains trickling off him out of the crevices of his clothes. He regarded his surroundings while brushing off his chest. All he could see was sand. A desert. It didn't make sense. He could have sworn that, just a few moments ago, he'd been sleeping on a bed in a large hospital located in the middle of Seoul. But he'd opened his eyes to a horizon of desert. Jinwoo took a fistful of sand and let it trickle out of his hand. It fell straight down. No wind at all. The wind wasn't all that was missing. Jiwoo also noted that there was no sun, moon, or stars in the sky. The emptiness made it look like the sky was covered in black ink. Despite this, he could view his surroundings without any problem. Where the heck am I? And then, HSSSS. Suddenly, his footing started giving way, sliding down a slope. WHO. Jiwoo scrambled away to avoid getting sucked down. As the hole grew bigger, he barely managed to claw his way to the top, using his hands and feet to scramble up. Huff, huff, huff! He stared down at the hole as he sat trying to catch his breath. Strangely, the bottom of the pit looked like it was bubbling. He got chills, just thinking about how he would have slid all the way down if he'd lost his footing even once. No! Wait. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed. It's not boiling. When he looked closer, he could tell something huge was squirming under the surface. He instinctively rose to his feet. He had a bad feeling about what would happen next. Just as he began carefully backing away, the sand in front of him exploded. Whoosh! It sounded like he was at the bottom of a raging waterfall. Jinwoo's eyes went wide. An insect? A gigantic centipede was emerging from the epicenter of the detonation. Rah-rah! The monster was as tall as a 5-story building. Jinwoo gulped. Oh hell no! It was impossibly huge. He'd never heard of a centipede this big, but the size of it wasn't the only thing that shocked him. Is that the monster's name floating above its head? Was he dreaming? He blinked hard, but nothing changed. Red writing still hung above the creature's head. It was like a monster in a video game. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Poison-toothed giant desert centipede. The aversion Jinwoo felt to its name rivaled the creature's creepy and grotesque appearance. Jinwoo was especially concerned about the word poison-toothed. He noticed 2 child-sized fangs attached to the bottom of its mandible. It was easy to infer what would happen if it bit him. The centipede's huge teeth and jaws continuously opened and closed as if looks like it's licking its chops. Right at that moment, he heard a chime in his head again. Ping. Penalty quest. Survival. Objective. Survive the required time. Required time, 4 hours. Remaining time, 4 hours. This is a joke, right? The centipede rushed straight at him through the sand as soon as the timer changed to 3 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds, as if it had just been waiting. F's chefs 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 sage. WH what? Jinwoo spun around and quickly started running. There was no time to think. If he wanted to live, he had to run. That was the only thought in his head. However, after a few steps, a pillar of sand shot up right in front of him out of nowhere. SSHHHH. Ugh! The force of the eruption knocked him down. He tumbled to the ground but sprang back up and was quickly brushing grains off his face when he saw it. Not 1, not 2, but FSSHHHHHH. FSSHHHHHH. 7 centipedes had emerged and were glaring down at Jinwoo. Scree! Scree! Jinwoo paled as he stood dwarfed by the screeching monsters. Shit! Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Exactly 4 hours later, Jinwoo reappeared in his hospital room. Whump! He coughed painfully as he lay on the floor. Cough! Cough! Bleck! Gag! The inside of his mouth felt gritty. His eyes still burned from the sand that had gotten in. He moaned in pain for a while before eventually sprawling out on the floor. He had no energy to even lift a finger. Huff! Huff! What was that? Another message appeared as he was catching his breath. Ping. You have completed the penalty quest. Jinwoo scowled. Penalty quest? What had he done to deserve a penalty? He racked his brain and recalled the daily quest he'd abandoned the day before. Was that? Thinking back on it, it had warned him that if he didn't complete the daily quest, there would be an appropriate penalty. Huff, huff, so that wasn't a hallucination? It hadn't been a hallucination. It hadn't been a dream. He didn't even have to pinch himself to know that. His lungs had burned when he'd been running around, and the pain when a centipede had scratched his leg was still fresh in his mind. It was all real. He'd actually almost died. That's not fair. Huff, huff. The penalty had thrown him into the jaws of death. Jinwoo was suddenly filled with an ominous feeling. If this really had been a result of the daily quest, this wouldn't be the last time. Right on cue, there came another notification. Ping. He jumped, but thankfully, it wasn't another quest. Your rewards for completing the penalty quest have been delivered. Would you like to check your rewards? Y/N. Rewards. The word rewards caught Jinwoo's eye. The problem was that he didn't have the energy to check. The situation just didn't allow for it. Forget about rewards. Let's get some rest first. His vision slowly blurred. Soon, he fell into a deep sleep. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Oh dear! What happened here? The following morning, the nurse who entered Jinwoo's room was shocked at the sight. The patient was collapsed on the floor and surrounded by sand. His body and clothes were also covered in it. She threw the patient's chart on the bed and urgently pressed the call button. Please send some more help. Soon, the physician in charge rushed into the room. What? What happened to Mr. Sung? I'm not sure. He was fine last night, but this is how I found him this morning. Well, let's move him to the bed. 1, 2. They hoisted Jinwoo onto the bed. As they did, no one noticed he'd gotten a paper cut from the chart that had been tossed there. I'll take a look. The doctor examined Jinwoo thoroughly, but found nothing wrong. He's just asleep. He breathed a sigh of relief. The Hunters Association had requested that Jinwoo receive the best care. He'd been anxious that something might have happened to the young man. Let him sleep. He looks exhausted. The doctor made to leave, but then looked around the room and scratched his head. By the way, this room needs to be cleaned. I'll leave it to you, Nurse Yura. Yes, doctor. After the doctor left, Nurse Yura Choi pressed a hand to her beating heart. She was glad it hadn't been anything serious. Though their feelings might not be as strong as those of the patients themselves or their families, no doctor or nurse would ever want to see their charges harmed. Hospitals for hunters tended to have many serious cases. They didn't want any additional injuries befalling those entrusted to their care. Phew! After calming down, Yura pondered where to start cleaning and, by chance, spotted drops of blood on the floor. Oh! It dripped from Jinwoo's hand, which happened to be stretched out over the side of the bed. Startled, she rushed to examine his hand and turned it over. What? Though there were clear blood trails, there were no wounds from which they could have originated. Even after she wiped his hand clean, she couldn't see any injuries, as his wound already closed. Yura nervously inspected her patient's face. Jinwoo was still sleeping like a baby.